You get out?
Oh, Bernie, what? Yeah.
That's good.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Mario.
Gerard has told us he's coming back to join us tomorrow.
Yeah.
Gerard, he says he's feeling better.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Mario.
Hello.
There's the stage. I was wondering where it was.
Yeah.
So you still at the second minion in Shari? You still go to the second minion Shari?
Who's that?
Saul, you still go to the second minion in Shari's Villa?
I haven't been there since the COVID started.
Really? Okay.
His children have taken away the lock and the keys.
They did. They haven't been in my house, Bernie.
That's why you can't get the keys back.
We drive around Sunday and wave.
All right.
Oh,
Long day, Mario.
sorry?
Sounds like a long day. How do you get these screenshots that you put as your background here?
It's called filters. It's not a screen.
So
But only,
where do you see?
I think it only works with my Apple computer. It doesn't work with the Windows, I don't think.
Okay.
I tried, Bernie. It's not there. I asked them the same question last week.
If you're on a computer, Bernie.
Yeah. I can put my hand up like that, right? Thumbs up.
No,
Yeah,
Hello,
but that's
everybody.
something else.
What does it do?
At the left of the screen at the bottom, it says video.
Yeah.
Click on it,
Yeah.
open the window, and if it says filters, you have it.
It just shows you choose a virtual background. That's it. Maybe that's it.
Oh, no.
Or video settings. What's that?
The virtual background only works if you have a green screen or your computer is very new and doesn't need it.
Okay. So, hi, Harold.
Hi, what's going on?
Hello, Harold.
Oh, that's all.
You're in the pink today, huh?
Yes, a pink day. You got a pink eye and pink shirt. Maybe just pink shirt.
That's not pink.
No.
This is, what is it?
Plum. It looks like plum.
Fuchsia.
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 Yeah,
That's
for
it.
you too. Did you just curse me? Where's our leader?
Hi, Michael.
Hey, Mario, how are you?
All right.
Mario, do you know the people in the first row there?
Yeah, they were my fans. My fans.
Okay. Just curious.
What was that Woody Allen movie? It was a Woody Allen movie like that.
Maybe. It's
Where
it's
she
called
was
the-
in, she came into the film. It's a very good movie.
There you are.
Who's here?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening.
We are on 127.
127.
Right.
The Hilchas Chinuch Ktanim, the laws of Chinuch. Issues of Chinuch, training and educating children, span a wide range of topics in halachot, including kashrus. In this year, we will analyze some of the fundamental principles of Chinuch, as well as to some practical halachic applications, some of which are included within the laws of kashrus. Many of them are related to the laws of Shabbos. There are two fundamental mitzvot incumbent upon the father with regard to the chinuch of his children. The first is the obligation to teach them Torah. That comes from Dvarim V'limadtem osam es bneichem ledaber bom, v'shivtecha b'veisecha, v'letecha b'aderech, v'shav kukumecha. The second, separate from the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, is to properly educate one's children to serve Hashem in a general sense, which includes how to properly observe the mitzvahs. This is evident from the following pasuk in Mishlei and the comment of the Mitzudas David, who explains that the word chanoch means to train and educate the child from a young age to follow the ways of the Torah according to his ability. It says chanoch ledar al pi darko, ki yaskin lo yasr mimenu. When he gets older, this kind of training will not leave him. Says the Mitzudas David, chanoch hitchil v'hargel tanar b'shnayim. Two things. Lo licho b'avodas Hashem l'fi derech chochmaso, that he should follow Hashem according to his wisdom, in ma'at v'marbei, u'chashiyem murgal b'avodas Hashem, by becoming, customary in work in serving Hashem, as gam ki yaskin lo yasru mimenu. He won't stray when he gets older. Ki yitei lev laskil ki sharon amasahi. So what is the source of this general mitzvah of chinuch? We had a source for the mitzvah of limud Torah. Is there a source for this general mitzvah of mitzvah? The Gemara Nazir mentions that such a notion exists, but it doesn't provide the basis or source for it. It says in Nazir Chavtes, Amrei Shlakish, K'dei l'chancho b'mitzvahs, Sovar ish chayav l'chanech b'no b'mitzvos, but it doesn't give a source for that din. So the Meshech Chochma, was Rav Meir Simcha of Dvinsk. He lived in Dvinsk in the late 1800s, the Or Sameach, and the Meshech Chochma was his commentary on Chumash. So the Meshech Chochma suggests that just like the obligation of a father to teach his son is biblical, so too the mitzvah of chinuch has a scriptural basis from a famous pasuk concerning Avram Avinu. Because it said to Ki Dativ, Hashem says to Avram, I know, L'man asher yitzavet banav et beito acharav, like you are someone who's going to command his children to follow after him. V'shamru derech Hashem lasot tzedakah mishpat, l'man avi Hashem al Avraham et asher diber alav. So the Meshech Chochma, commenting on that pasuk, says, Hinei chinuch mitzvah l'bonim b'mitzvah saseh lo nizkar. Doesn't say clearly to be machanech his children in mitzvah saseh. Rak aseh u'lemartem es bneicha. Right? We have the aseh of Talmud Torah with Talmud Torah. V'roma ben Nazir dav chavtes divrei kol av chayav l'chanech b'no b'mitzvahs. Ve'ein ha'isha chayav l'chanech b'no b'mitzvahs. That's what the Gemara says. Perush dahave kimo mitzvah saseh shel Talmud Torah. The Meshech Chochma seems to be learning from that Gemara that just like there's a mitzvah saseh to teach Torah, there's a mitzvah, and the Aisha P'tura of that there's similarly a mitzvah to teach them to do mitzvahs. The Ye'uyan, you should look into Orach Chaim, Siman Shin Mem Gimel, Bibirei Agon Rabbi Eliyahu Vilna, the Gra, U'Magen Avram, who says, "U'makor mitzvahs chinuch b'mitzvahs aseh, mikaro b'zeh pasuk me'Avram Avinu shetzivaz banav b'ktayim ala mitzvahs." It's the pasuk we just read in Bereishis. And Kra, the Chanoch l'nar Pidark or Mishlei, Shevia Rambam, the Sof Hilchos Makolos Asuros, Havi Medivrei Kabbalah. That's rabbinic source. Avalai Iker. Me Avraham, l'kan mashma sha'af l'bonos mitzvah la'av. It seems also that daughters have to be trained by their fathers to do mitzvahs as well. So, despite this source mentioned by the Meshech Chochma, a simple reading of the Gemara in Sukkah seems to indicate that the mitzvah of chinuch is not d'oraisa, but it's only drabanan. As the Gemara states that a child who's old enough to be educated to perform the mitzvah of Sukkah is obligated to do so midrabanan. Says Masech the Sukkah Amar Mar, call. What is the word call? Like kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshvu basukot. L'rabos ha'saktanim. It includes even the minors. Freit the Gemara vatna noshim v'avodim uktanim p'tur min ha'sukkah. Ktanim are potter. Lo ikasha kan bekotten shegil chinuch. A cotton who reaches the age of chinuch, he will have a chiyuv, which is midrabanan chinuch. Kan bekotten shelo giyel chinuch. Cotton shechiach lechinuch. Midrabanan. So the Gemara says, if a cotton shegil chinuch, the chiyuv to teach him is only rabbinic. What are you quoting me a pasuk for? Says the Gemara, yes, midrabanan, but ukros machta ba'amud. The pasuk was just support for the rabbinic teaching. So it seems clear, according to halacha, that we treat the mitzvah of chinuch with regard to each particular mitzvah as a d'rabbanan requirement. That means the mitzvah of lulav has the mitzvah of chinuch attached to it, which was rabbinic. The mitzvah of matzah has a mitzvah of chinuch attached to it. Each mitzvah has a d'rabbanan requirement of chinuch. The Shulchan Aruch records the notion of chinuch for positive mitzvahs in a number of cases. You'll see Orach Chaim 17 where he talks about it in Tzitzis, Orach Chaim 689 where he talks about Megillah, and we'll quote the one regarding Sukkah where there he writes explicitly that the mitzvah is d'rabbanan. Katan she'eno tzarach li'imo, a child that is not clinging to its mother, Shehu keben chamesh keben sheish, 5 or 6. Chayiv b'sukkah medivrei sofrim kedei lechancho b'mitzvahs. So there, the Shulchan Aruch says it very plainly that this mitzvah of chinuch regarding mitzvahs is clearly rabbinic. Okay, what about the mother?
Yeah, what about the losasa though? Well, he emphasized only the asay.
Step by step.
Okay.
Right now we're going to deal with the lavin. That's going to be the next topic. But right now, we've learned that the mitzvahs asay have a mitzvahs chinuch attached to them, each one, but it's rabbinic. Now, what about mitzvahs asay? Do mothers have a chiyuv to teach their children? So the obligation of chinuch is imposed first and foremost upon the father. Some hold that the obligation applies to the child himself. Does the mitzvah of chinuch apply to the mother as well, or just to the father? So the Gemara Nazir, it only mentioned the father. Rashi, in a commentary to the Mishnah Chagiga, indicates that the mother is also subject. Says the Mishnah Chagiga, Hakol chayvin b're'iyah. Everybody's obligated for the mitzvah of aliyah l'regel 3 times a year. He has to make himself seen in Yerushalayim. Chutz micheres shoyte v'katan, a deaf, mute, a meshigan, and a child. Now, what kind of child? Ezel katan. Kol sheni Yaakov lirkav al kteifo shalavi. We're talking about a very young child who cannot sit on his father's shoulders. Ula'alos mishalayim larabayis, divrei Beis Shammai. Ubeis Hillel kol sheni Yaakov le'echos biyod shalavi. Ula'alos mishalayim larabayis. A child who cannot hold on to his father's hand. Shneamar sholosh regol. Says Rashi, Ezeu katan, aval mikan ve'elech, aval pishen chayvin Torah, hitilu chachayim al avi v'al imo lechancho b'mitzvahs. So Rashi says, b'peh mole, that the mitzvah of chinuch is on the mother as well. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Shin Mem Gimel, Yesh ma'achronim shesovrim the mitzvah of chinuch mutal gam aleim. Some commentaries cite proof to this position for the Gemara in Sukkah that indicates that Heleni Amalka assisted her sons in sitting in a kosher sukkah. On Rav Yehuda Maisa behileni Amalka belud Shaisa Sukkasa Gvoa Me'esri Mama. Chachamim hold that the maximum height of the sukkah is 20 amas. Rav Yehuda held that it could be higher. But Hilni Amalka sat in a sukkah higher than 20. The Chacham didn't say anything to her. Amrulo, so they said to Rav Yehuda Misham Raya, Isha Isoptur Sukkah. The fact that the Chachamim didn't say anything is because she's a woman and she's palter. Amr Lahan, so Rav Yehuda said, yeah, but Valo Shiva Vanim Avule. Heleni Amalka had 7 sons, so she had to be concerned about the fact that the sons were sitting in a kosher sukkah. And the Od Kol Masayu Abnei Chachamim. So, according to Rav Yehuda, a sukkah that is higher than 20 amas is kosher, but that's not the normative halacha. And he proves this from the fact that the Chacham did not comment to Heleni Amalka that her sukkah was not kosher, even though she had sons who were required to sit in a kosher sukkah. The Gemara explains that since she had 7 sons, at least one of them must have reached the age of Chinuch, which is approximately 6 or 7. And the sages would have said something if the sukkah was not kosher. Moreover, the reason that Rabbi Yehuda adds that all of her actions were performed based upon the words of the sages was so that it could not be argued that even if at least one of her children was subject to the rules of Chinuch, she did not bother to fulfill the halacha. So this is a source, a proof source, or a proof text based on Rabbi Yehuda that a woman is mechuyev to do chinuch. Other Rishonim, such as the Tosfos Rishonim, holds that there is no obligation of chinuch on the mother, and they deflect the proof from this Gemara, right? That Rabbi Yomer the chinuch lo shayach ela ba'av, aval ba'adamach lo shayach bechinuch. There is no chinuch only by the father. Hilkach nami ein nizorn lafrisho. We also don't separate him from Lavi. Umaisa Dileni Amalka. Why, you're going to tell me, what about Dileni Amalka? She was a woman. She Yashra Yuva Nebesuka. Shem Havalem Av Chinchem Bekach. What do you mean? Maybe there was a father and he already gave him a chinuch about this. Vafilo lo alehem Av, Haita Mechanchem Lemitzvah Ba'alma. That means, not
Was there a
this-
father? Was there a father? She married Helena Malka?
she was one of the Chashmonai kings. But
She
she
was a queen.
She was a queen. There was no king. She ruled.
So she had children without a husband?
No, originally she had a husband. She obviously had a husband when they have children. But according to the Shita that there was no father, what they want to say is that Hileni didn't educate them about the chiyuv of the mitzvah. He told them, listen, just like women, if they choose to shake the lulav, it's a mitzvah to shake the lulav, but it's not obligated on them. That's how the Tosfos Rishonim want to argue, that there's no raya from here that the mother. Huh?
She's looked at favorably, right? In Shas?
Yeah. Yes. Some achronim, such as the Stei Chamed, he was an achron in the 1800s who wrote like an encyclopedia, even interpret Rashi differently than the simple meaning of his words. Which when he said Hitilu Chachamim al Aviv al Imo, they argue that he refers to a case where the father is not present. Then the mother has a chiyuv. But if the father is present, then even Rashi agrees that there's no mitzvah of chinuch upon the mother. It says Imayem Chayev es l'chanech es b'noah u'machlokas haposkim me'arkam u'marka, from one side to the other. From the Reish Havamina, we would have thought to be very Rashi b'chagiga, Vezeo Cotton, Mizbor Yofet. There, it seemed very clear that a mother has the chiyuv. But v'shuv ra'iti la'rav petach hadov v'shekosov b'chelik beis b'shem agon chikre lev v'kshemei sa'av kulam chayiv zeh mechanech es b'noah. That if the father should pass away, then of course there's a mitzvah of chiyuv on the mother. But if he's ein rayim Rashi and iskar le'el diyesh lomer shedivrei Rashi heim k'shemei sa'av da'im chayav es l'chancho. It's only after the death of the father. Okay. So Elazar Genauer asked, very good. So far we've been dealing with the assays. What about the lavia? So in addition to the obligation of the father to train the child to perform positive mitzvos, there's also a negative component of this halach, the obligation to prevent the child from violating a prohibition. This is evident from the following quote from Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Shabbos. Kotten oichel nevelas. If you have a child that you see eating treif meat, ain't Bezdin mitzuvin lafrisho, and Bezdin's walking by. Bezdin doesn't have to pull the food away from him. Aval aviv mitzuva ligor bar lafrisho. No, but the father has to yell at him and separate him from the isser. Says the Ramah, mi isser deraisa. That's if he sees the child doing isser deraisa. However, lachilo biyadayim asra afilu dvarim shasrim devesofrim. That means, but to mamish feed him with your hands, that's prohibited, even things that are asr midrabbanan. So the nafkamina would be, let's say you see a child eating chicken that was cooked in milk, which is only a isser d'rabbanan, you wouldn't have to be mafreshim from that. But you certainly couldn't feed it to him. V'chein asr lagilo b'chilul Shabbos u'moed. You have to get him used to not violating Shabbos and Yontif. That's already a filu b'dvarim shem mishum shvus. Even rabbinic isurim, you have to make sure he doesn't violate. Says the Ramah, Yeshomrim, because of the cotton, the lo higiach lechinuch. This is all a cotton who has not reached the level of chinuch. It means only a cotton like who's 4 years old that you see eating. So, that means if you see a cotton who's 4 years old eating something treif, you have to be separated. The father has to separate him from that. Bezdin does not. However, higil chinuch, tzrichim lafrisho, even Bezdin, even someone who's not the father. You have an 8-year-old kid, you see him eating a McDonald's hamburger, you have to be mafreshim from it. Some hold no, that the only person who has the mitzvah of chinuch is the father, not Bezdin. So some of the points mentioned in Shulchan Aruch and Ramah are complex. It seems clear that a father must rebuke a child who's violating a prohibition, at least a deraisa one, and prevent him from doing so. The Mishnah Berurah adds that although the Ramah claims that a father need only rebuke a child violating a mitzvah deraisa, that's what the way we learned, in truth he must prevent the child from violating a drabanan as well, due to the mitzvah of chinuch. Says the Mishnah Berurah that afilu lechanech banav of noisav, the mitzvahs hutal alav, k'dichsiv chanoch l'nal pi darko. You have to do that. That's for positive mitzvahs. For kol sheken lafishim iser, and to separate him from a prohibition, that's mutal ala'av. And then the Mishnah Berurah comments on the iser deraisa. Says the Mishnah Berurah, be'emes afilu miser d'rabbanan chayv lahafrish. He says the father has to be mafreshim from iser d'rabbanan as well. The same way that he has to teach him about Mikra Megillah and Ner Chanukah, those are all mitzvahs asayis d'Rabbanan, so you have to do rabbinic Isrim as well. So what's the nafkamina? Let's say the father, if the father didn't separate the child from eating an Isser D'Rabbanan, the Beis Din doesn't protest. The Beis Din will force the father to separate the child from the Isser D'Oraisa. The Mishnah Berurah continues and discusses the age at which the mitzvah of chinuch begins, both for positive mitzvahs as well as for negative mitzvahs. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is all in Shim Mem Gimel, which is by Shabbos, the laws of Shabbos. V'din shir achinuch b'mitzvah saseh, hu b'chol tinuk lefi charifaso v'yidyaso, b'chol davar lefi inyano. He says it depends on the sharpness of each child. Kigo, hayodeh minyan Shabbos. If the child already understands what Shabbos means, chayav lagil lishmo kiddush, vavdola, has to hear Kiddush Vavdola. Hayodel isatev kalocha chayv b'tzitzis. If he knows how to put on tzitzis, that's the time we have to teach him tzitzis. And that applies to both positive mitzvahs that are doraisa and positive mitzvahs that are rabbinic, like Megillah, like Dalet Koisos, like Ner Chanukah. These are all by mitzvah saseh. Aval chinuch below saseh, ben shel Torah, ben shel divrayim, ubechol tinik shu bar avana, shemevin kishonim lo shezeh osur lasur zolechol. Once the child understands the concept that you're not allowed to do this, or you're not allowed to eat this, so that's the age, and it's different for each child. Aval tinik sheina bar avana klal, but if the child doesn't understand anything, ein avi mitzvah lamana bal karcho. He doesn't have to, against the child's will, to prevent him machol sasuros, to eat something that's not kosher, or mechal Shabbos, or to yell after him that he's been mechal Shabbos. Afilu b'yesur shel Torah. Kiven sheinu mevin klal, ha'inyan ma'shemona mafridu. You don't know. He doesn't understand what you're separating him from. So that's how the Mishnah Berurah holds. Now,
He is with the bracha.
also,
Right?
go ahead.
Everything is with the bracha, right? With children, when they do a tzitzis, they say with bracha,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
With Hashem's
Yes.
name.
Yes, absolutely. That's part of the chinuch.
Okay.
You're being mechanech him in the rabbinic assay of making a bracha. Right? The only two brachas that are deraisa are birchas haTorah, birchas hamazon. Certainly, you'd have to teach them that. And of course, when you're going to shake the lulav, you're going to teach them to make the bracha as well. And the same thing by Mikra Megillah and Ner Chanukah and Dalet Koisos. The bracha is included.
What about
Okay.
tefillin? What time can he put on tefillin? What age can if
So
a child?
tefillin is different because tefillin requires a guf naki. So that's why the minig is to do it a month before, very soon before his bar mitzvah. Because the problem is you have to be shomer the tefillin with a guf naki. And they worry that children will not do that. So you do start before the bar mitzvah, but not very much before the bar mitzvah. Right?
Even though even though he's a brilliant child and he knows some children at a much earlier age can absorb a lot more.
No, but it has to do with guf naki. It has to do, for example, you're not allowed to pass wind when you're wearing your tefillin, et cetera, et cetera. Child is immature. So that's why the minhag normally is to start tefillin very soon, right before the bar mitzvah. You do start while he's a katan, but not very much before. It has to do with guf naki, not with havana.
Okay.
Now, what about nisayeya? That means, can you help a child violate a prohibition? Right? In addition to the two elements we have discussed of training a child to observe mitzvahs and preventing them from violating a prohibition, there's another element, not helping a child violate a prohibition. This was mentioned in Shulchan Aruch quoted above, and it's forbidden, even when the child is very young and has not reached the age of chinuch. The source for this is the Gemara in Yevamis. Lo sochlum ki sheketz heim. This has to do with eating insects. It also means lo sachilun, don't eat it and don't feed it. La hazrak dolam alaktonim. That means adults should be careful not to feed this to children. The lo lisve lebiadayim, even if they're 2 years old, even though if they don't understand. Right? We were told that you don't have to be mafresh somebody from Isser, if they're not certainly rabbinic Isurim, right? We said you don't have to be mafresh them if they're not Higia L'Chinuch. So if you see them eating something, you don't have to separate them. But you're not allowed to feed them biyadayim. That's what we learned from this Gemara. The Torah uses this phrase lo sochlum concerning the consumption of insects 3 times. Consumption of insects, consumption of blood, and the consumption of Tumah. The Ramban explains that we derive from these three cases that this principle of not directly causing children to violate a prohibition applies to all other halachos as well. Says the Ramban in Vayikra. Ubo b'zeh azoros rabos pator kafi midrash rabosenu b'dam shrotzim v'tuma. Right. The reason why the prohibition was mentioned. Oh, I just remembered. So Alexander Sender Daniel Ben. Who's your father's name? Shmuel. Right. I have to write that down. Hang on. 1 second. Asking me from Israel.
I'll send it to you as a text after this year.
Because I had 7 people responded. I'm just asking the people who did not respond.
I'll send it to you right after. I'll send it to you right after this year.
Elazar ben Binyamin? Elazar, we can't hear you.
And Binyamin Chaim.
Ben Binyamin Chaim.
Yeah.
What about
Good.
Mike? What about Michael Summer?
Moshe ben Mordechai.
Moshe ben Mordechai Summer. Saul Bernstein. Saul.
He's also on mute, probably.
Yeah, Saul.
Kohen.
Saul. Yeah.
Kohen.
Saul, what is
Yeah.
your name? Shaul ben who?
Moshe. Shaul ben Moshe Cohen.
Shaul ben Moshe Cohen.
I emailed it to you.
Today?
No, the same night, a couple days ago, Monday.
Okay.
Sunday or Monday.
Okay, I must have not seen that one. Okay, I think I have everybody. Is it 1, 2, 3, 4? Okay, very good. Right. So says the Ramban, we cannot assist the cotton in violating these isurim. If they did it on their own, we don't have to be mafresh them. Remember, both the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah said that the mitzvah of lahafresh is the father. If it's not the father, Bezdin doesn't have to be mafresh at all. The lo shayach chinuch Bezdin and lav bilvad, even by mitzvahs to rise. So the Rabban seems to agree here. Now the Gemara in Yevamos implies, right, that one who is not a parent may even assist a child in violating a prohibition, as long as one does not directly instruct the child to do so. So what is this? This is a famous Gemara in Yevamos. Rav Yitzchak bar Bizna, Irkasule Miftach de Midrash b'Shus Harabim b'Shabta. He lost the keys to the shul. It was in Rosh Hashanah, and nobody can carry Dal Amos Rosh Hashanah. How are they going to open up the shul? Also, come to Rav Das. They went to Rav Das. Omer Lei, Zildabar Toli V'Tayu V'Talayu Hasu. Go and lead the young children like a Pied Piper to that area. You don't have to show them anything. It's just the imishkachlu. If they find the keys and you don't say anything to them, ma'asaluhu, they will bring it to the shul, right? So they're violating Shabbos, but you are not, since you're not the father, we said Bezdin is not mitzvah, and therefore that's a way of transferring the keys to be able to open the shul. According to the Gemara, Rav Padas held that it was permitted for one who is not the parent to lead the children to the area of the lost keys, provided they do not instruct the children to pick them up. You don't tell the child, pick it up. The child will discover it on his own. If they carry the keys back on their own accord, which violates the prohibition of Otzah, nothing wrong has been done. Now, it's not entirely clear from the sugya how old the children were, and if they were above the age of understanding or not. From the wording of the Shulchan Aruch, which we learned earlier tonight, it would seem that they were already older than the age of Chinuch. And even in such a case, other adults who are not the parents may allow them to violate a prohibition. But some Rishonim hold that the children of the Gemara had not reached the age of Chinuch. But children that are older than that should be prevented from violating a prohibition even by others. So this is a machlokas Rishonim. It's not so pashut regarding this issue. The Rambam notes that a parent would not be allowed to do this, and the parent would have to instruct the child to stop. Right? Aval pishein bezdin mitzuvin lahafish sakotin, mitzvah aviv liger bo lafrisho. The father has to yell at him and to separate him. And the Lechem Mishnah explains that the Rambam did not have a direct source for this. Rather, he based himself upon logic. Umasha cause of Aval pishein bezdin. Zui Svaras Rabbeinu Ru'uya Elah. He said this was based on his svara by himself. The Shulchan Aruch, together with the Mishnah Berurah, in the same halach already quoted earlier, rules in accordance with all these points. Says the Shulchan Aruch. Right? If you see a child eating the vela, you don't have to separate. Bezdin doesn't have to separate. The father has to. And Ramah says that's only Meser Deraisa. Lachilu biyadayim, to feed him, even rabbinic things you can't feed him. But you don't have to separate him from rabbinic. The father. Rabbinic Yisrum as well. Says Ramav Yeshamit Choseh Bekodim Deloy Gil Chinuch, Aval Gil Chinuch Shechin Lafrisho, even from rabbinic Yisrum. Yeshamit Deloy Shach Chinuch LeBezdin Elav Bilvad. That's only on the father, not on Bezdin. And the Mishnah Berurah clarifies all these points. Ulachniso b'bayis shetuma b'socho. Are you allowed to put him into a house that's tamei? I guess we're talking about if he's a Kohen, right? Because it's only relevant for a Kohen. A Kohen has to stay away from Tumah. Or, Lispos lo b'shar yisurim, or to feed him prohibited items. Asra afilu b'tinuk she'enu baravon adayin. Even a very young child who doesn't understand, you're not allowed to feed him dvarim yisurim. Asra l'choladim afilu atinuk she'enu baravon klal. Mishnah Berurah again repeats that it's usher to feed. The davar is there who usher in a Torah. This is a rabbinic, a Torah law. It's it's a special pasuk. The kiblu chazal der tzorah lomar lo sachilum l'ktanim, don't feed ktanim. So it's really midoraisa. Chen bedam ksiv kol nefesh mikem lo sochal dam. The kiblu chazal der tzorah lomar lo sachil l'ktanim, don't feed ktanim. Chen betumas kohanim. And more v'amarta, and more l'gdolim shirim l'ktanim. B'nei misholosh mitzvahs eilon u'lemedim l'chol haTorah kula. The Chol Yisrei Torah Asur Lachilim, you may not feed anything that is Asur in the Torah to young children, even if they don't understand. Ol tzavosum sheyavru, or to command them to do it. Lachein Asur litin litinuk davar machal shalis afilu lischok bo. Don't give him something not kosher to play with. Shemayachilen, and that's the havi kimachile biyadai. We should note that the reference to the Beis Din in all these cases is not limited specifically to members of the Beis Din, it includes members of the community. We're not obligated to stop a child that is sinning, in opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, as opposed to the Ramah. Nevertheless, the Kaf HaChaim spells out that they may not tell a child that it is permitted to violate a prohibition. Afal gav de'ein bezdin mitzvah lafrisho, afilu hachi asur lomer lo mutaru. But Bezdin or another person, not the father, is not allowed to tell a child, oh, this is permitted for you. You might not have to be mafresh him, but you cannot say to him it's permitted. Kivan da pi'oro ochel, because he would be eating it based on your heter. And that's like kamachilu b'yadayim, which you're not allowed to do. The Magen Avram adds that there's no obligation to prevent a child who's below the age of understanding from taking something forbidden of his own initiative. Because of Yisr v'heter, the dafka betinuk, the bar havana, that you can't, you have to prevent a child. Aval lav bar havana leslan ba. You don't have this, if he doesn't have capable of understanding, because the hayonik afilu mebema tmeya, a child can nurse even from a non-kosher animal. So you don't have to separate him if he's under the age of understanding, if he takes it on his own. We see for the Magen of Avram that if a young child who's below the age of understanding took a non-kosher food, began to eat it, the parent would also not be obligated to remove it. Nevertheless, the Ramon, the Shach, caution that a child that does not follow the rules of kashrus can potentially cause spiritual damage. Says the Ramon Yoredeya, you should avoid finding a Gentile nursemaid to nurse in Mefshar B'Yisraelis. If you have if you have a choice, the chol of nachris metamtem alev, it seals up the heart. Umodel lo teva gives it a bad nature. V'chein lo tochal ameinekes afilu Yisraelis dvar masurim. The woman who's nursing should not eat non-kosher things, even a Jew. And the child itself should avoid eating non-kosher things. He calls them mazik lo b'ziknu, so it'll damage him when he gets older. And the Shach explains, klomar, if a child, we said if a young child is eating something rabbinic, prohibited rabbinically, father doesn't have to be mafresh, right, the way we learn, that's midina. But lifnei mishras adin, we call makam yafrishu. You should do it lifnei mishras adin. They shemazik lo beziknu, so it'll damage him. Shemetamtim alei v'gorm lo tevara. It'll stuff up his heart. I'm not sure it's talking about medically.
Spiritually.
It's a spiritual timtum alev. Yeah. I'm not saying it doesn't. We're not talking about cholesterol here. We're talking about spiritual things, like a lave yodas, lave mavin, in that sense. Rav Yoshua Neuwirth, the author of the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, summarizes the bottom line of many of the halachos that we have seen here concerning chinuch, with respect to lavim, in his Sefer Chinuch Abanim L'Mitzvos. He divides it into three categories. B'davar HaChinuch L'Zehirus B'lo Saseh, in regarding how you deal with children with prohibitions, Efshar Likboa Sholosh Dargos Gil. There are three different age stages. Kat Neshena Baravana Klal, a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, right? They have no understanding at all. The Hainu, Agil Shnasayim or Sholosh, he says until 2 or 3. Ein chovel afrisha afilu misurei Torah. You don't have to be mafresh even afilu misurei Torah. That's, I think, other people, because we learned that the father has to be mafresh him from divrei Torah, even under the age. That's what the Ramah wants. So it could be that here they're talking about other people. You don't have to be mafreshim. You shouldn't encourage him to violate the prohibition or encourage him to eat the forbidden food, even if it's only rabbinic. And isser zechal kol adam, and that's a prohibited thing on everybody. A child who has some understanding, let's say from 2 or 3 on, He understands the concept that you say you're not allowed to do this or you're not allowed to eat this. So from 2 to 3 until 5 or 6, beyond what we said above, the mother and father has to not just prevent him of a gam lafrisho, you have to separate him. But that we've learned, up until the age of 5, other people don't have to be mafresh. Then, once a child is 6 years old, so for the rest of us, the only thing you have to separate children from is Isurei Torah. If it's rabbinic, you don't have to be mafresh them if they're doing it on their own. You can't encourage them to do it. But you can't be mafresh them. Now, what about there's a shas adchak, and should you tell a child who's 8 years old to violate something rabbinic that you need done?
Like a Shabbos Goy?
Yeah, that's what we're going to deal with now. Children violating prohibitions in cases of necessity. Well, we've just come up with the rules. We saw that above the age of 6, every person has to be mafresh. If you see a child doing something, the Isra Torah, you got to be mafresh him. The parents have to do it even from the age of 2. We're talking about you as a stranger. If you see somebody, a child, 7, 8, 9-year-old child doing something, violating an Isra Torah, you have to stop him from doing it. If you see him eating something rabbinic, prohibited rabbinically, you don't have to stop him. Now we learned you can't feed it, you can't be a daim, you can't feed him even the rabbinic Isra. But we're talking being mafresh. Now, what about children violating prohibitions in case of necessity? So although we have seen children that have reached the age of understanding, should not be allowed to violate any halachic rules, some poskim hold that Chazal were lenient in some cases of an Isser D'Rabbanan, when it is necessary for the benefit and well-being of the child himself. The principle is evident from the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Yesh omrim, shekol shel tzorcho shel tinik, if it's for the benefit of the child, you go to achila shtia, lo gozer bo chachamim klal. The chachamim don't prohibit anything. Umuter lachilo biyadayim, you can feed him even with your hands. Kol davar she'eni surel midivri, as long as it's rabbinic. Im tzorach lekach. Afal pi shegi lechinuch, even if you reach the age of chinuch. Aval meino tzorach lekach osur lachil. Doesn't need it, you cannot feed him. Afilu eno bar havana, even if he doesn't understand. Lavi tzorach limchos bo, the father has to protest if imu bar havana. Afilu b'yisur divrei sofrim. Sharei osur laniko cholav ima achar esrim bar b'chodesh. Normally, you're not allowed to nurse from your mother beyond 24 months. Afal pishen yisur cholav isha divrei sofrim. Drinking mother's milk is only a rabbinic issur. However, after 24 months, he doesn't need it. However, if he needs it, let's say it's a child that needs mother's milk. So we can be soymech on those who are makel by rabbinic isurim. It would be better if get a non-Jew to feed him the rabbinic isur. This approach is based on the Rashba and the Ran, cited by the Bir Halacha. However, the Bir Halacha opines that the Shulchan Aruch doesn't agree, since he does not differentiate between cases where the child needs the food or other forbidden activities to be done or not. It is thus a machlokas achronim whether one may be lenient in such cases of necessity. Nevertheless, it may be permitted according to all to allow the child to violate the prohibition in such cases if the parent does not explicitly instruct him to do so. One illustration of this principle is given by Rav Mordechai Eliyahu in the Darchei Halacha, where he states that if a child of Ashkenazi descent does not have enough food options on Pesach, it is permitted to feed him baby cereal of kitniot. Asr lachil davar isra afilu letinik ben yomo l'tzorach refuah brios. But you cannot feed something prohibited to any child, even if he's 1 day old. However, l'tzorach refuah brios mutter, but for medicine or health, it's permitted. V'lachein tov shelo latet letinokot avkat chalav nochri. Don't give formula that has doesn't have chalav Yisrael in it. If they're makpid on chalav Yisrael, elam kein lo mayochel, unless he has nothing else to eat. Chemuter latet letinok b'Pesach daisa mikitnios ksher lePesach. Avu b'shahar ve'ena mochlim kitniot. That you could also give kitniot on Pesach to such a child. Other examples are brought again by Rav Neuwirth in Chinuch Habarim L'Mitzvos. Mutter lashkos b'Shabbos hakotten chalav shenechlav bo bayom beheter. Let's say milk was milked on Shabbos in a permissible way, kigon al yedei nochri, or b'mechonat chaliva b'ofna mutter, or through a Gentile, or through a machine that was set up in a permissible way. I remember in Malea Gilboa, they had where Lenny Kaplan lives, they had a very large dairy where where it was all set up automatically for them to be milked on Shabbos, and so this milk could be used. Maybe as long as you don't have milk from the day before, but the cotton needs it. He also says, "Mutter litain b'Shabbos b'dei hayeled chumash v'sidur shivel v'sakneses." You can give a child a chumash or a siddur to carry. Af derech makom she'ein bo eruv, if there's no eruv. V'usha chumash v'sidur yu miuyodim l'tzorach hakotten. As long as the chumash or siddur was sort of specified for the use of the child. V'shlo yeh makom shedarku yavim shesarabim gmuras. And because all of our streets are at most, they're not Rishus Harabims. Even if we don't have an Eruv. So it's just rabbinic, and therefore you're allowed to violate that. Mutter litain b'Shabbos v'fnei cotton uga sheyesh aleh tzuras osios. You can give a child a piece of cake that has letters on it. A gadol cannot do it, but a cotton can do it. It's a dispute among the poskim that is discussed over there in the Shulchan Aruch. Mutter lachilas hakotten lefnei sheyispalel. You can feed the child before he davens. Lefnei sheyishma kiddush. Avu b'shemitz lachanech hasayelu l'tfilu shmias hakiddush. V'nei shebachilat mein mishum iser v'hakotten tzarech l'kav. There's no iser in the eating, and the child needs it. Beit atzorach mutter l'gadol l'sapers hakotten b'chol. You can give chol hamoed. You can give a child a haircut on chol hamoed. Afilu kotten shekvar yigil chinuch. Avu b'shem mishum gzeira shegazu chachamim. Asur lo atzmon l'star b'chol hamoed. The adult can't give himself a haircut, but the child, even if he's reached a level of education, can do so. The following are two more common scenarios involving children on Shabbos and the approach taken by some contemporary poskim in determining the halacha. A young boy, 6 years old, scared of the dark, and his night light was not turned on before Shabbos. Is it permitted for the parents to instruct or to allow him to turn it on himself? According to Shulchan Aruch Harav, it would seem that this may be permitted if we assume that turning on most lights today does not violate Nisur D'Oraisa. Nevertheless, the Piskei Teshuvos notes that this issue is subject to machlokas. Asfarim noagim lachmer b'zeh, u'kestimas ha'Shulchan Aruch v'Ashkenazim hamekilim l'tzorach mitzvah yesh lem al milismo. Sfarim are machmir, but the Ashkenazim are lenient. As long as it's not something that happens all the time. Even the Sephardim can be makel if it's just a happenstance. You can't let him do Yisur Deraisa. So if turning on a light is midoraisa, which most of us feel it is, because you're closing a circuit, so it's boneh. Now, some of the newer lights that are LED, perhaps there's opinions that say that that's rabbinic. So if it's rabbinic, then the Ashkenazim will have something to rely on. We didn't command him to do it; he took it himself. If it's for his needs, we don't have to separate him. So according to Piskei Teshuvos, telling a child to violate Nisud Rabbanon is subject to dispute, as not everyone accepts the opinion of the Rashba and Shulchan Aruch. While telling him to violate an Nisud Deraisa is definitely forbidden. In contrast, all agree that it is permitted to let him violate any prohibition on his own without instructing him to do it. Thus, it would seem that if the child insists on turning on the light, all would agree that the parent need not protest. But instructing the child to turn it on would be subject to the machlokas that we discussed. Question number 2. Someone forgot to turn on the heater in a room before Shabbos. May a parent bring his 2-year-old son to the heating controls and have him turn it on? The answer to this question should be that it is permitted, since as we learned above, it is permitted for a parent to assist a child under the age of understanding, less than approximately 3, in violating a prohibition, provided that the parent does not directly tell them to do it. And this is indeed the ruling given by Rav Simcha Bunim Cohen in his work Children Halacha, in the quote below, though the parent should not express satisfaction in the result. Right? We learned that it is forbidden to instruct or cause a child to violate a prohibition, even if the child is below chinuch age. However, it is permitted to place a forbidden item in front of a child, even though the child will make use of that item in a forbidden manner. Accordingly, one is permitted to place a child of less than chinuch age in front of a light switch so that the child may turn it on or off. Likewise, if it is not certain that the child will turn the switch, one may even place the child's hand upon it. One must remember, though, that in switching off the light will benefit only the parent. The child realizes that the parent must stop the child from doing so. So I think we covered a lot of ground. There's a few more subject matters which we'll finish next week. Doing tshuva. Does a child have to do tshuva for sins that he committed when he was a child? Fasting on fast days. But we will start Hafroshas Chala as well. We're going to learn the dinim of Hafroshas Chala besides the finishing up the laws of Chinuch. Any comments, questions?